In 1920, the best-selling soft drink in the United States of America was not Coca-Cola. It was a bitter, dark soda from New England, brewed from a root that tasted like medicine, sold in a bottle with a pointing man on the label, and named after a pond in Maine that most Americans had never heard of. That year, Moxie outsold Coca-Cola. Not in one city, not in one region. Nationally. The numbers were not close. 3 decades later, you could drive through 12 states without finding a single bottle. The factories went quiet. The delivery trucks stopped running. The Moxie men, those grinning salesmen who had once rolled into 40,000 American towns on horseback contraptions and 8-foot promotional bottles, disappeared from the roads entirely. An entire generation of drinkers grew old, and no younger generation picked up the habit. The shelf space went to other names. The refrigerated roots went to other brands. And Moxie, the soda that had beaten Coca-Cola at its own game, shrank back to a handful of counties in northern New England, barely alive, sustained by loyalty so stubborn it bordered on defiance. But the real story of Moxie is not the collapse. It is the story of a Civil War doctor who brewed medicine in a mill town and accidentally invented the American soda industry. It is the story of a marketing genius who built the most recognizable soft drink in the country, without radio, without television, and without a single dollar of outside investment. And it is the story of one decision made in one terrible economic season that handed the future of American beverages to Atlanta, Georgia, and never gave it back. Every week, we tell the stories behind the brands and companies that shaped American life. Give the video a like and subscribe if you want to keep hearing them. The story begins in Union, Maine in 1835. Union, Maine in 1835 was not a place that produced famous men. It was a granite-hard farming township in Knox County. Cold 9 months of the year, dependent on timber and the sea, populated by families who measured success in surviving the winter. Augustine Thompson was born there on November 25th of that year, the son of a rural household with no particular claim to wealth or distinction. He grew up in a state where medicine and superstition were often the same thing. Traveling doctors carried bottles of colored water and called them cures. Patent medicines, alcohol-laced syrup sold door to door, promised to fix everything from melancholy to paralysis. The American public, largely without access to trained physicians, bought them by the case. Thompson watched this and drew a conclusion that would take him 30 years to act on. The country needed medicine it could actually trust. He trained as a homeopathic physician, a discipline that, in the 1850s, sat at the serious edge of American medical practice. He studied the properties of plant-based compounds. He developed a specific interest in bitter botanical roots, particularly gentian, a flowering alpine plant whose extract had been used in European medicine for centuries as a digestive tonic and restorative. Gentian tasted terrible. That, to Thompson, was precisely the point. Something that bitter, he believed, had to be doing something real. On October 1st, 1862, Thompson set aside his medical practice and enlisted in the Union Army. He was commissioned captain of Company G, 28th Maine Volunteer Infantry. 10 days after he signed the papers, he served, he came home, and he returned to medicine. But the war had changed his sense of urgency. He had watched men die from exhaustion, from nerve collapse, from the accumulated physical damage of sustained stress. He had seen what the body did when it had nothing left. He wanted to build something that gave it something back. He settled in Lowell, Massachusetts, not by accident. In the 1870s, Lowell was the industrial capital of New England. Its textile mills ran 24 hours a day. Its population was dense, overworked, and chronically fatigued. Lowell was also home to the Ayer Drug Company, at the time the largest patent medicine factory in the world. Thompson set up his medical practice on the edge of this city and began seeing patients. He began formulating. The gap he saw was specific. The American patent medicine market was saturated with alcohol-based tonics that made drinkers feel temporarily better and then considerably worse. Cocaine derivatives were common, opium tinctures were legal and widely sold. Thompson was not a prohibitionist. He was a doctor. He understood that stimulants worked, but that the ones on the market created dependency rather than recovery. What did not exist anywhere on the American market in 1876 was a non-alcoholic, non-narcotic restorative that a working man could take daily without becoming dependent on it. He saw the gap. In 1876, working from his Lowell practice, Thompson created the compound he called Moxie Nerve Food. The base was gentian root extract, intensely bitter, entirely legal, and genuinely active as a digestive and nervous system tonic. To it he added cinchona bark, sassafras, wintergreen, and caramel for color, and a thin thread of sweetness that barely cut the bitterness. He claimed it contained extract from a rare, unnamed South American plant. That plant, it would later emerge, was the gentian itself, repackaged in the language of mystery that patent medicine demanded. He dispensed it as a syrup directly to patients. There is no commercial sales record from these early years. It was medicine given to sick people in a doctor's office on the edge of a mill town. The first commercial bottling came in 1884. Thompson had spent 8 years quietly building his formula, expanding his understanding of what the compound could do, and watching the American appetite for carbonated beverages begin to grow at soda fountains across New England. Carbonation was added the following year in 1885, and on March the 7th of that year, the first bottle of carbonated Moxie Nerve Food was sold commercially. Thompson received his trademark the same year. He left his medical practice entirely in 1886, surrendering a decade of clinical work to run a beverage company out of Lowell, Massachusetts, with a product that tasted like bitter roots and a belief that Americans would learn to love it. He borrowed to capitalize the early operation. The initial investment Thompson committed to marketing and sale was $15,000, equivalent to more than $350,000 in modern dollars. For a solo physician from a farming county in Maine, it was everything. The early advertising made claims that would not survive a single news cycle today. Moxie Nerve Food, the advertisements promised, could cure paralysis. It could reverse softening of the brain. It treated locomotor ataxia, alcoholism, insanity, and nervous exhaustion caused by heat of summer. The Lowell Sun ran these claims as though they were medical findings. Readers sent letters describing miraculous recoveries. Thompson did not invent this playbook. It was the language of the entire patent medicine industry, but he was playing a longer game than most of his competitors understood. Because Moxie actually tasted like something bitter. Yes. Sharp, yes. Unlike anything else sold at an American soda fountain. But consistent. Reproducible. Real. That would matter more than anyone anticipated. In 1885, the American soda fountain was a specific kind of American institution. It lived inside the drugstore. Marble counter, brass fixtures, a druggist in a white apron who mixed flavored syrups with carbonated water by hand. The drinks were sweet, almost uniformly, aggressively sweet. Vanilla, cherry, lemon phosphate, cream soda. The entire category was built onto the assumption that sweetness was what Americans wanted from a carbonated drink. Moxie arrived and broke that assumption in half. The formula Thompson had developed over 9 years of clinical work produced something that no upright competitor could replicate, because no competitor had started from the same place. Gentian root, the botanical core of Moxie Nerve Food, was not used in any other commercial beverage in the United States. It produced a flavor profile that drinkers described, then and now, in contradictory terms. Sweet on entry, then a clean, spreading bitterness that moved from the back of the tongue outward, finishing with a dry, almost mineral quality that made the next sip feel necessary. It was not unpleasant. It was not pleasant in any conventional sense. It was, as Thompson's early advertising would eventually put it, distinctively different, and that distinction was not a marketing phrase. It was a chemical fact. The bitterness itself was the innovation. In a market full of drinks that tried to please everyone immediately, Moxie asked its drinkers to meet it halfway. Some refused. Many came back. A significant number came back so often and so reliably that they could not imagine the day without it. The repeat purchase rate of Moxie's early loyal drinkers was the structural engine of the company's growth, not breadth, but depth. These were not casual customers. They were converts. The packaging Thompson brought to market in 1885 was straightforward by later standards. A clear glass bottle, the Moxie name in bold block lettering, a label that leaned heavily on the medicinal heritage of the product. Brown glass, later. Returnable bottles, from the earliest commercial runs. A practical decision that kept costs down and built distribution infrastructure simultaneously. When a drinker returned an empty Moxie bottle to a druggist, the druggist ordered another case. The bottle itself was a delivery mechanism for repeat business. At soda fountains, Moxie was sold as a syrup concentrate mixed with carbonated water, the standard model of the era. A glass cost 5 cents, 1 nickel. At a time when a loyal mill worker earned between $1 and $1.25 for a 10-hour shift, 5 cents was not nothing. But it was achievable. It was the price of a modest daily pleasure. Thompson priced Moxie to be within reach of the working-class drinkers who most needed, in his medical framing, what it offered. That price point was not accidental. It was a positioning decision made by a doctor who understood his patient population. The go-to market strategy in the early years relied almost entirely onto the soda fountain network of New England. So Thompson worked the druggist circuit. Lowell first, then the surrounding mill towns, then Boston. He did not attempt national distribution in the 1880s. He built density in a contained geography, establishing Moxie as the default tonic at hundreds of soda fountains across Massachusetts before pushing outward. By 1890, Moxie syrup was available at fountains from Portland, Maine, to Providence, Rhode Island. The product had not changed. The footprint had simply grown, one druggist account at a time. The St. Louis World's Fair of 1904 changed the scale of everything. Thompson had died the previous year, June 8, 1903, in Boston at age 67, and did not live to see what his product became at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. Moxie was served at the fair to hundreds of thousands of visitors from across the country. For most of them, it was the first time they had encountered the flavor. The reaction was not unanimous enthusiasm. It never was with Moxie. But it was memorable, and in the beverage business, memorable is the necessary first step toward loyal. Orders came in from distributors in states Thompson had never reached. The fair was not a marketing campaign. It was an accidental national introduction. Into this moment stepped Frank Morton Archer. Archer was not a scientist or a physician. He was a salesman. Specifically, the kind of salesman who understood that selling was not about explaining a product, but about making people feel something before they ever tasted it. He joined the Moxie operation as Thompson's business partner in the company's earlier years and, after Thompson's death, became the driving force behind everything the brand became in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. His first major innovation was scale. Archer commissioned 8-foot-tall replica Moxie bottles, built from wood and painted in Moxie's signature colors, and sent them around the country on horse-drawn wagons. They visited more than 40,000 American towns. Crowds gathered not because the bottle contained anything, but because it was impossible to ignore. The drivers, called Moxie men, handed out samples, distributed promotional material, and moved on. The brand arrived before the product. By the time a Moxie bottle appeared on a drugstore shelf in a town the wagon had visited 6 months earlier, the name was already familiar. In 1916, Archer invented something entirely his own. He mounted a full-scale aluminum horse onto an automobile chassis and engineered the controls so that the driver sat in the saddle and operated the vehicle from horseback position. He called it the Moxie horsemobile. It was by any rational measure an absurd object. It was also one of the most effective promotional devices in the history of American consumer marketing. Everywhere the horsemobile appeared. At fairs, outside ballparks, in front of dance halls, crowds followed it through the streets, children chased it, newspapers covered it. The Moxie man on horseback became a cultural fixture in New England and beyond. Within 4 years of the horsemobile's introduction, Moxie was outselling Coca-Cola. That sentence carries weight only if you understand what Coca-Cola was in 1920. It was not a regional brand. It was not an emerging challenger. It was the largest soft drink operation in the United States, backed by Atlanta Capital, distributed across 46 states, and spending aggressively on print advertising in every major market. Moxie beat it anyway, on flavor loyalty, on regional density, on the kinetic carnival energy of Frank Archer's promotional machine. By 1920, Moxie had built something that no advertising budget could manufacture from scratch, a drinker who would not substitute. In diners and drugstores and union halls from Boston to Baltimore, there were men and women who wanted Moxie specifically, not a soda, not a cola, not something similar. Moxie, the bitter one, the one with the pointing man on the label. That was the structural advantage, and it was about to be tested by forces that no promotional horsemobile could outrun. The 1920s were the best years Moxie ever had, and the worst years it ever misread. At its peak, the Moxie operation ran out of a facility in Jamaica Plain, Boston, a full manufacturing and distribution plant at 74 Heath Street, that the company called, without irony, Moxieland. The plant opened in 1928. It ran a mile of conveyor belts. It stacked 150,000 cases of finished product at any given time. Visitors were welcome, and they came. Frank Archer had produced a short film showing every step of the production process, emphasizing cleanliness and precision at every stage. In an era when food safety was a genuine public concern, Moxie was showing its work. The factory was not just a factory, it was a promotional asset. The advertising of this period was unlike anything else in the American soft drink industry. Archer understood instinctively what modern brand strategists would spend decades trying to codify, that a product with a polarizing flavor needed advertising that leaned into the division rather than apologizing for it. Moxie's campaigns did not promise universal appeal. They promised that people of taste, people with standards, people who were, as the slogan declared, at all particular, chose Moxie. The full line ran, "It's the drink for those who are at all particular." It was a dare. It told potential customers that if they didn't like it, the problem was their palate, not the product. A second slogan ran alongside it throughout the 1910s and 1920s. "What this country needs is plenty of Moxie." The phrase worked on two levels simultaneously, as a beverage advertisement and as a statement about American character. The word Moxie, meaning nerve, grit, and determination, was already entering the American vernacular by this period. The brand had done something almost impossible in consumer marketing. It had contributed a word to the English language. Drinkers who had never tasted the soda were using the brand name as a synonym for courage. That is not advertising. That is cultural penetration at a depth no campaign budget can manufacture. Archer added a Moxie song, sheet music printed and distributed as a promotional giveaway. He added Moxie-branded dishware, bottle openers, paper fans, and ornate carved clocks. He partnered with toy manufacturers. The giveaway catalog ran to dozens of items. In an era before radio saturation, Archer had built a tactile brand ecosystem, objects in people's homes, bearing the Moxie name, reinforcing the product's presence in daily life without requiring the consumer to see a single advertisement. The celebrity partnerships of this era were selected with precision. Movie stars promoted Moxie in the 1920s, the silent film era, when a recognizable face in a print advertisement carried enormous cultural weight. The names have largely faded from public memory, but the strategy was sound. Align the brand with glamour, energy, and aspiration. The Moxie man on the label, pointing directly at the viewer, confident, slightly challenging, matched the tone of these endorsements exactly. He was not offering the drink, he was selecting you. The most significant celebrity association came slightly later, and it lasted decades. Ted Williams, the Boston Red Sox outfielder, two-time Triple Crown winner, and the last man to hit 400 in a major league season, became the face of Moxie in the 1940s. Williams was not a soft endorsement. He was one of the most respected and demanding athletes in American sport, known for his absolute refusal to compromise on anything he believed in. The alignment with Moxie was culturally coherent in a way that transcended the transaction. Williams appeared in print and radio campaigns with lines built around his voice and competitive identity. One campaign had him declare that Moxie was what he reached for between games. Not because the company paid him to say so, but because, reportedly, he actually drank it. In New England, that distinction mattered. The regional identity Moxie had built by the mid-1920s was specific and deep. This was not a brand that happened to sell well in New England. This was a brand that New England had adopted as its own, a distinction that carries entirely different implications for long-term loyalty. In the working-class neighborhoods of Boston, in the mill towns of New Hampshire, in the fishing communities of coastal Maine, Moxie was not a preference. It was an inheritance. Grandmothers served it. Fathers brought it home. Children grew up with the taste, bitter and sweet simultaneously. Yum, yum. The way children in your other regions grew up with sweet tea or lemonade, it was the flavor of a specific geography and a specific way of life. President Calvin Coolidge, a Vermont native and a man of almost theatrical New England austerity, was known to drink Moxie. He reportedly celebrated his inauguration with a bottle of it. Whether the story is precisely accurate is less important than what it signified. Moxie was the soda of serious, self-reliant, no-nonsense Americans. That identity had commercial value, but it also had a ceiling. And in 1923, that ceiling began to take shape, though no one inside the Moxie operation appeared to notice. In Atlanta, Georgia, in 1923, a man named Robert Woodruff became president of the Coca-Cola Company. He was 33 years old. He had never run a beverage company. What he had was a systematic understanding of how markets work at scale and an advertising instinct that would, within a decade, fundamentally redefine what a soft drink could mean to an American consumer. Woodruff's first act was to build an analytics department. His second was to hand the Coca-Cola advertising account to Darcy Advertising and its writer Archie Lee, a man who believed that the future of consumer marketing was not information, but emotion. Lee looked at the existing Coca-Cola campaigns, wordy, product-focused, cluttered with claims, and stripped them down to images. Simple images. A sweating bottle on a hot day, a family at a picnic, a soldier receiving the Coke from a smiling woman. He hired Norman Rockwell. He built a visual language for Coca-Cola that required no reading, no prior knowledge, and no acquired taste. It required only feeling. Moxie, during these same years, stayed the course. Archer continued running the horsemobiles. He continued the giveaway campaigns. He continued the slogans that rewarded the already converted and challenged the unconverted to earn the product's respect. It was the right strategy for a brand that was winning. It was entirely the wrong strategy for a brand that was about to face the most sophisticated marketing operation in American commercial history. The divergence between the two companies in the 1920s was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was the kind of divergence that only becomes visible in retrospect. When you can lay the trajectories side by side and see where they separated, Moxie was not losing in 1925. It was not losing in 1927, but Coca-Cola was building something that Moxie had no answer for. A national emotional identity that belonged to no region, no demographic, no acquired taste. Coke was becoming the idea of refreshment itself. Moxie was still fundamentally the drink for people who already knew what it was. Then October 1929 arrived, and the American economy collapsed. The Great Depression did not destroy Moxie immediately. What it did was force a decision, and the Moxie company made the wrong one. As revenues contracted across the entire soft drink industry, the company's leadership looked at the budget and identified the largest discretionary line item: advertising. Frank Archer's sprawling, expensive theatrical promotional machine, the horsemobiles, the celebrity partnerships, the giveaway programs, the campaigns that had for 2 decades kept Moxie's name in front of Americans who might otherwise have drifted toward other brands. They cut it, not reduced it, cut it broadly across every market, including New England. The reasoning was not irrational. In an economic catastrophe, you protect cash, you reduce exposure, you survive to fight another day. It was the logic of a company trying to outlast a crisis. Coca-Cola made the opposite decision. While Moxie pulled back, Woodruff and Lee accelerated. They understood something that the Moxie leadership did not. A depression is not a pause in consumer life. It is a period of intense emotional need, and the brand that shows up during that need, consistently, visibly, warmly, owns the relationship that follows. Coca-Cola increased its advertising presence during the Depression years. It placed Coke in the hands of Rockwell's figures, ordinary Americans, tired and hopeful and recognizable. It told a country that was suffering that there was still something simple and good available for 5 cents. Moxie went silent at precisely the moment its competitor was speaking loudest. The market share numbers that followed were not a surprise. They were an inevitability. By the mid-1930s, Moxie's national presence had contracted visibly. The company raised its price, figures, from a nickel to a dime, at a moment when unemployed Americans were counting every coin. Simultaneously, and reportedly to offset rising costs, cheaper substitute ingredients began appearing in the formula. The exact substitutions are not fully documented in the historical record. What is documented is the result. Longtime drinkers noticed. The flavor that had built 4 decades of loyalty, that specific, unreplicable combination of gentian bitterness and thin sweetness, shifted. Not dramatically. Enough. In 1939, Frank Morton Archer died. He had been the operational soul of Moxie's marketing for more than 3 decades. No single person inside the company understood the brand the way he had. No successor had been developed. The horsemobile campaigns wound down. The theatrical, promotional energy that had made Moxie a national spectacle in the 1910s and 1920s had no one left to sustain it. The company that remained was competent. It was not visionary. And in the American soft drink industry of the 1940s, competence without vision was a slow retreat. During World War II, Moxie attempted a revival of its old promotional language. The slogan, "What this country needs is plenty of Moxie," returned, reframed as a wartime rallying cry, a statement about American resolve. It ran in print. It had some resonance, but the wartime soft drink market was constrained by sugar rationing, and every major brand faced the same limitations. When rationing ended and the post-war consumer boom began, Coca-Cola and Pepsi had the national distribution infrastructure, the advertising budgets, and the emotional relationships with returning veterans to capitalize on the moment. Moxie had New England. The post-war decades saw the final narrowing. State by state, Moxie's distribution footprint contracted. Markets where the brand had once held shelf space, the Mid-Atlantic, the Midwest, parts of the South, went to Coke and Pepsi, as those companies locked up distribution agreements and refrigerated retail space that Moxie could not match. The Ted Williams campaigns of the 1940s provided a last burst of genuine regional momentum. Williams was beloved in Boston in a way that transcended sport. His military service as a Marine pilot in World War II and Korea, his refusal to tip his cap to the Fenway Park crowd, his absolute and uncompromising excellence at his craft. His association with Moxie gave the brand a decade of borrowed identity. But Williams retired from baseball in 1960, and no replacement was found. By 1970, Moxie was functionally a New England regional brand, beloved, specific, stubbornly alive, but operating at a fraction of the scale it had commanded 50 years earlier. 1 million cases a year, where there had once been a claim on the entire American market. The pointing Moxie man on the label still pointed, but fewer and fewer Americans knew what he was pointing at. The collapse of Moxie did not arrive as a single event. It arrived the way most institutional failures arrive, as a series of decisions that each seemed defensible in isolation, and only became catastrophic when viewed as a sequence. The first warning sign appeared inside the company's own sales data in the early 1930s, and management read it incorrectly. The numbers showed declining volume in markets outside New England. The interpretation was that the Depression was suppressing discretionary spending, a temporary contraction that would reverse when the economy recovered. That reading was partially correct. It was also fatally incomplete. What the data was also showing beneath the cyclical noise was a structural shift. Moxie's acquired taste flavor profile required active marketing to convert new drinkers. Without that marketing, without the horsemobiles, without the celebrity campaigns, without the constant theatrical presence that Archer had built, the conversion pipeline dried up. Existing loyal drinkers kept buying. New drinkers never started. The base aged. It did not replenish. The decision that could not be undone was made sometime between 1929 and 1931. No board meeting minutes have survived to give it a precise date. What the historical record confirms is the outcome. Moxie's advertising budget was cut to a level that effectively ended its national promotional presence at the exact moment Coca-Cola was doubling down on emotional brand building. The reasoning, usually protect cash during economic crisis, was the reasoning of every cautious manager who has ever presided over a brand's slow death while believing they were practicing responsible stewardship. The irony is nearly perfect. They saved the company's money and spent the company's future. The customer response was not immediate. Loyal drinkers do not abandon a brand the moment its advertising disappears. They keep buying on memory, on habit, on the specific pleasure of a thing they have always reached for, but they tell fewer people. They recommend it less. They do not bring their children into the habit with the same conviction because the culture around the brand, the campaigns, the events, the social proof of visibility, has gone quiet. The conversion of the next generation requires active effort. Moxie stopped making that effort. In New England drugstores, through the 1930s and into the 1940s, longtime Moxie drinkers noticed something else. The flavor was changing. The change was subtle enough that no single drinker could have proved it in a blind test. But across enough conversations, in enough drugstores, the observation accumulated into a pattern. Something in the formula was different. The gentian bitterness that had defined the drink for 50 years, that specific, clean, medicinal finish that either converted drinkers permanently or repelled them immediately, had softened. The cheaper ingredient substitutions of the Depression era had altered the compound in ways that were economically rational and commercially damaging simultaneously. The drinkers who loved Moxie loved it for exactly the quality that was being quietly removed. There was an attempt at recovery. In the 1940s, the Ted Williams campaigns provided genuine lift, documented sales increases in the New England market, that demonstrated the brand still had the capacity to respond to promotional investment. Williams was the right endorser at the right cultural moment. A New Englander, a veteran, an uncompromising figure whose association with Moxie carried authenticity rather than transaction. The campaigns ran through radio and print. They worked. Within their geography, they could not compensate for 2 decades of national retreat. The structural problem was distribution. By the late 1940s, the American soft drink industry was reorganizing around a new retail reality, the supermarket. Chain grocery stores were replacing the independent drugstore as the primary point of soft drink purchase. Supermarket shelf space was finite, and it was allocated by sales volume. Coca-Cola and Pepsi had the volume to command premium placement, eye level, end caps, refrigerated cases near the checkout. Moxie had the volume of a regional specialty. It was shelved accordingly, warrants allow when it was shelved at all. A drink that requires an acquired taste cannot acquire new tasters if new tasters cannot find it on a shelf. The ownership structure complicated recovery further. The company had split into two entities, the Moxie Company, retaining New England bottling rights, and Moxie Company of America, holding national distribution rights. The division of territory that had once seemed like an efficient geographic allocation became, in the post-war market, a coordination failure. National campaigns required unified decision-making. Two companies with overlapping but distinct interests could not produce it. The brand that needed to speak with one voice was speaking with two, or, increasingly, with none. Moxieland, the Jamaica Plain factory that had once processed 150,000 cases at a time, closed in 1953. The building at 74 Heath Street, with its rooftop Moxie advertisement and its arrow pointing toward Logan Airport, went quiet. Production moved to contracted bottlers. The mile of conveyor belts stopped. The workers collected their final checks and found other work in a post-war Boston economy that had other things to offer. The closure was not announced with ceremony. It was the administrative conclusion of a financial reality that had been building for 20 years. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, Moxie's distribution continued to contract. States fell away one by one, not through dramatic losses, but through the quiet arithmetic of unsustainable economics. A bottler in Pennsylvania dropped the line. A distributor in New York stopped carrying it. Each individual loss was manageable. The cumulative loss was the national market. By 1980, Moxie was available in perhaps 6 states. By the early 1980s, even within its New England stronghold, the brand was in genuine danger. Shelf space was shrinking. Bottler agreements were lapsing. The company that owned the trademark was operating without the resources to defend it. In 1982, a local business owner in Lisbon Falls, Maine, a small river town of fewer than 9,000 people, looked at what was happening to the soda his community had grown up on, and decided it was not acceptable. He organized. He petitioned. He launched a campaign to save Moxie from extinction in the state that had always loved it most. Out of that campaign came the Moxie Festival, an annual 3-day celebration in Lisbon that drew crowds, generated press, and reminded Maine that Moxie was still there, still worth fighting for. It was an act of communal stubbornness in the tradition of the brand itself. In 2007, Cornucopia Beverages, operating as the Moxie Beverage Company based in Bedford, New Hampshire, acquired the trademark and resumed production at a facility in Londonderry. The brand stabilized. It did not recover its national presence. It sold approximately 1 million cases per year, a number that sustained a brand, but not a movement. The final chapter arrived on August 28, 2018. Coca-Cola announced the acquisition of Moxie, the company that had outmaneuvered Moxie during the Great Depression, the company that had taken Moxie's national market share, city by city and state by state, across 4 decades. The company whose advertising genius had made Moxie's promotional silence in the 1930s into a death sentence. That company now owned Moxie. The price was not disclosed. Production stayed in Londonderry. The formula remained. The pointing Moxie man on the label kept pointing. A Coca-Cola spokeswoman said the company's goal was to protect Moxie's heritage and regional culture while exploring the opportunity to bring the brand to a wider audience. The sentence landed differently in New England than it did in Atlanta. In Lisbon, Maine, at Frank's Pub and Restaurant, Named for the man who founded the Moxie Festival, the regulars absorbed the news the way New Englanders absorb most news, quietly, with suspicion, and without visible panic. One local put it simply, Moxie once outsold Coke in New England. It's like Ford buying Chevrolet. The Moxie Beverage Company was gone. The independent bottler was gone. The last organizational link to the Thompson family, to Frank Archer, to Moxieland on Heath Street, to the horsemobiles that had visited 40,000 American towns, gone. The sign above the Londonderry facility did not come down, but something changed that August that no press release could fully describe. The brand survived. The company did not. Moxie did not die. That is the first and most complicated fact of its legacy. Under Coca-Cola ownership, production continued at the Londonderry, New Hampshire facility. The same plant that had been bottling Moxie since the cornucopia years. The formula was not reformulated. The label was not redesigned. The pointing Moxie man, the figure Frank Archer had placed on every bottle and promotional piece since the early 20th century, continued to point. For a consumer picking up a bottle in a Maine grocery store in 2024, the experience of Moxie was functionally identical to what it had been a decade earlier. The acquisition on the surface changed very little. Beneath the surface, it changed everything that mattered to the people who cared most. The Moxie loyalists of New England, and they are a specific, identifiable, and entirely unironic community, received the Coca-Cola acquisition with the particular wariness of people who have watched institutions they love get absorbed by larger ones and emerge as something technically the same, but spiritually hollow. The National Moxie Congress, an organization founded to preserve the brand's history and advocate for its availability, continued operating independently of the Coca-Cola Company. Membership ran between $11 and $16 annually. The Congress maintained archives, promoted the brand in regional media, and functioned as the institutional memory of a history that Coca-Cola's corporate structure had no particular incentive to remember. The Moxie Festival in Lisbon, Maine persisted. Every summer, the second week of July, the town of 800 people hosts a 3-day event that draws approximately 30,000 visitors, a ratio of attendees to permanent residents that almost no American food or beverage festival can match. The festival runs a clam bake, a parade, a cooking contest, a car show, a chugging competition. A recent 11-time champion of that competition drank 7 cans in 2 minutes. The record stands without apparent challenge. At the Matthews Museum of Maine Heritage, a dedicated Moxie collection houses memorabilia, advertising materials, and production artifacts spanning more than a century. Moxie hats, pins, and earrings move steadily from the gift shop. The secondary market for vintage Moxie memorabilia is active and specific. An original Moxie neon bar sign in working condition sells for between $400 and $900 on eBay, and sells quickly, typically within hours of listing. Early advertising trays from the 1910s and 1920s, the ones bearing the Moxie man's pointing figure against the brand's signature orange background, fetch $150 to $300 depending on condition. Moxie horsemobile photographs and promotional postcards from the Archer era circulate through antique paper dealers at prices that reflect genuine scarcity. These are not mass-produced nostalgia items, they are artifacts of a specific American moment that will not be recreated. On May 10, 2005, Maine's governor signed a bill designating Moxie the official state soft drink. The legislation passed with the kind of bipartisan support that Maine's legislature rarely produces on anything. It was not a symbolic gesture in the way that most official state designations are symbolic. It was a codification of something that had been culturally true for over a century. That Moxie and Maine were, in some specific and unmetaphorical sense, the same thing. Lobsters, lighthouses, and Moxie, the bitter one, the one that required you to meet it on its own terms. The reason the original still matters, the functional, non-sentimental reason, is the gentian root. No other commercially produced soft drink in the United States contains it. The flavor that gentian produces cannot be approximated with artificial bitterness, compounds, or citrus derivatives. It is a specific botanical effect that acts on the palate in a specific sequence, and that sequence is either the thing a certain kind of drinker wants above all other options, or it is entirely unwelcome. There is no casual Moxie drinker. There are Moxie drinkers and people who tried it once. The brand's inability to expand beyond its loyal base was always a distribution and marketing problem. Versailles, not a product problem. The product was irreplaceable. It still is. The physical site of Moxieland, 74 Heath Street in Jamaica Plain, Boston, no longer houses a beverage operation. The building that once ran a mile of conveyor belts and stacked 150,000 cases of finished product has been converted to residential use. The rooftop advertisement is gone. The arrow that pointed toward Logan Airport points at nothing. The neighborhood around it has changed several times over since 1953, cycling through industrial decline, urban renewal, and the particular gentrification of a Boston neighborhood close enough to the city center to be expensive and far enough from it to have retained its working-class architecture. If you stand on Heath Street today and know what you are looking for, you can see the bones of the old factory in the building's proportions. Most people walking past do not know what they are looking for. The surprise footnote belongs to the word itself. Moxie, meaning nerve, courage, determination, the quality of refusing to back down when backing down would be easier, entered the American English lexicon sometime in the 1920s, drawn directly from the brand. It appears in dictionaries without attribution to its commercial origin. It appears in newspaper editorials, political speeches, sports commentary, and ordinary conversation across the United States used by people who have never tasted the drink and would not recognize the bottle. In 2026, an American child can be told she has Moxie by a grandparent who has no idea the word came from a bitter soda invented by a Civil War doctor in a Massachusetts mill town in 1876. The brand lost the American market. The word it gave to the American language never left. What Moxie represents, across its 150-year arc, is a specific and recurring American failure mode. The failure of a genuinely superior regional product to survive the transition from regional loyalty to national scale. Moxie was not beaten because it was inferior. It was beaten because the company that made it believed, at the critical moment, that what had worked would keep working, and cut the engine precisely when the competitor was building a new one. The Great Depression did not kill Moxie. The decision made inside a boardroom, in the face of the Great Depression, killed Moxie. The difference is not semantic. It is the entire lesson. American consumer culture does not reward patience with regional identity. It rewards the brand that shows up everywhere, for everyone, at every income level, with a consistent emotional message. Coca-Cola understood that in 1923. Moxie understood it too late or not at all. The tragedy is not that Moxie lost. The tragedy is that it was winning, and chose, at the precise moment of maximum consequence, to stop fighting. Somewhere in New England right now, in a gas station or a grocery store or a diner that has been serving the same regulars for 40 years, there is a bottle of Moxie in a refrigerator case. It is cold, it is bitter. It tastes exactly like it tasted in 1920 when it outsold Coca-Cola and the whole country seemed to be paying attention. The person who reaches for it knows what they are reaching for. They have always known. They drove past the Coke and the Pepsi and the 37 other options, and they picked the one with the pointing man on the label. The one that has been there longer than any of the others, that gave a word to the American language, that beat the biggest brand in the world, and then, quietly and without sufficient explanation, let the world forget it. If you want to understand what American beverage history actually looked like before Atlanta decided what everyone should be drinking, Moxie is where you start. Subscribe to the channel and we will keep telling these stories. See you in the next one.